Ibrahim Traoré takes control of the Sahel, and the world is watching. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. What happens when a movement stops resisting and starts governing? What happens when defiance turns into structure and protest becomes policy? In late 2024, something happened in the Sahel that barely registered in Western headlines, yet quietly sent a signal across the global system. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was named president of the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional bloc many had dismissed as temporary, symbolic, or unsustainable. But this was not a ceremonial appointment. It was a turning point, because leadership of a regional alliance is different from leading a single nation. It carries expectations, consequences, and responsibility at a scale that can no longer be ignored. And the words Traoré spoke that day made one thing clear. This was no longer about resistance alone. Tonight, we're going to unpack why this moment matters, and why it marks a new phase that powerful systems are watching very closely. Stay with me. Dear friends, for much of the past decade, Ibrahim Traoré has been framed as a symbol of resistance, a young leader confronting entrenched power structures, challenging external influence, and speaking the language of sovereignty with uncommon clarity. But being named president of the Alliance of Sahel States fundamentally changed the nature of that role. Resistance can be loud. Governance must be deliberate. From the opening moments of his speech, Traoré avoided celebration. There was no sense of triumph, no personal glorification. Instead, he spoke of weight, responsibility, and urgency. The enthusiasm of the people, he said, was not a reason to pause. It was a warning that expectations are rising and time is limited. Leadership, in his framing, was not a privilege. It was a burden. That distinction matters because the AES was never intended to exist as a slogan or a protest bloc. It was conceived as a structural response to a long-standing weakness in the Sahel: fragmentation. Individually, states could be isolated, pressured, or managed. Together, they represent something far more difficult to contain: a coordinated regional actor. This is where the outgoing president, Assimi Goïta, provided critical context. His remarks focused not on ideology, but on what had already been built. Not promises, not rhetoric. Institutions, a unified defense architecture, a confederal bank, a regional television network, a biometric passport and identification system. These are not symbolic gestures. They are mechanisms of permanence. They embed the alliance into daily life, into security, finance, mobility, and narrative. Once systems like these exist, dismantling them becomes costly, politically and practically. For years, critics assumed the Sahel alliance would collapse under pressure, that it lacked capacity, legitimacy, or cohesion. But institutions change the equation. Once people rely on shared systems, the alliance becomes more than an agreement between leaders. It becomes a lived reality. Traoré's speech made clear that AES is now transitioning from survival to construction. Security remains essential, but it is no longer the sole focus. The agenda has expanded decisively into development, diplomacy, communication, and economic coordination. One phrase stood out: self-reliance is no longer optional. It is now a priority. Food self-sufficiency was not presented as an aspiration for the distant future. It was framed as a concrete objective. This matters because food dependency has long been one of the quietest but most effective tools of influence. When supply chains are external, pressure is easy. When food is produced locally, leverage weakens. Infrastructure and industry were discussed with the same urgency, not as abstract goals, but as projects that must move quickly. Traoré emphasized pace repeatedly. The message was clear: delays are no longer acceptable. The alliance understands geopolitics now, he said. It understands how the world works, and it will no longer rely by default on systems that keep it dependent. One of the most revealing moments came when Traoré referenced international organizations that provide little value to the alliance. The implication was careful but unmistakable. Participation will no longer be automatic. Alignment must serve a purpose. For American audiences, this is an important signal. Stepping back from legacy institutions is not isolation. It is leverage. It transforms relationships from obligation to choice. It changes negotiation dynamics. Goïta reinforced this framing by describing the AES as an emerging geopolitical reality. Not an experiment, not a temporary arrangement, a reality shaped by shared sacrifice, popular support, and cultural continuity. He emphasized that progress and security had shifted the balance, allowing displaced communities to return and social cohesion to begin rebuilding. Whether one agrees with every assessment is secondary. What matters is the confidence with which these claims are made and the structures backing them. Equally important is the tone of both leaders. There was no grandstanding, no emotional escalation. Instead, the language was administrative: roadmaps, protocols, coordination, institutions. This is the language systems recognize. It signals seriousness. This is where Traoré's leadership style diverges from how African defiance is often portrayed. Instead of confrontation, he projected discipline. Instead of outrage, organization. That combination is far more unsettling to established power than rhetoric alone, because rhetoric can be dismissed. Structure cannot. Unity was a constant theme, not as a slogan, but as strategy. Fragmentation has historically been the entry point for external control. Coordination is the counterweight. Defense, finance, diplomacy, and communication are being aligned deliberately. Youth support was emphasized not for symbolism, but for legitimacy. A project without generational buy-in cannot endure. The AES is positioning itself as a long-term framework, not a momentary disruption. For viewers in the United States, this moment challenges a familiar narrative. African leadership is often discussed through the lens of crisis, instability, or dependency. What unfolded here was something different: institution building under pressure. This does not mean success is guaranteed. The challenges ahead are significant. Economic integration is complex. External pressure will persist. Internal discipline will be tested. But the shift is unmistakable. By accepting the presidency of the AES, Ibrahim Traoré moved from being a national disruptor to a regional architect. And architects do not change landscapes overnight, but when they do, the changes tend to last. That is why this appointment matters. Not because of who Traoré is alone, but because of what the Alliance of Sahel states is becoming. A bloc with mechanisms, with identity, and with intent. And once those elements align, the conversation changes, from whether such a project can survive to how it will reshape the balance of power around it. So this moment was not about celebration. It was about transition. With Ibrahim Traoré at its head, the Alliance of Sahel states signaled that it is no longer defined by resistance alone, but by construction. Not by reaction, but by design. Institutions have been built, objectives have been set, and expectations have been raised, not just among leaders, but among millions of people watching what comes next. The question now is not whether Africa can speak for itself. It is whether the world is prepared for an Africa that organizes, coordinates, and governs at scale. Because when sovereignty becomes operational, not symbolic, it changes everything. Thank you for watching.